Okay, now that we have our data table nice and pretty, the next thing we'll have to do is add in the data that we collect, and then we're going to go ahead and graph it. We want to display the data that we have collected. Again, the purpose of a data table is to collect and organize our data, and then we want to paint a pretty picture of what that data means with a graph. Before I go to Excel and graph it, I really want to make sure that I understand what it's going to look like. One issue with Excel is it can manipulate your data and do all sorts of different things to graph it, depending on what you want to do. So you really have to know what you want to do, or you will likely have Excel make a graph that does not represent your data. So when I think about my data table, my graph, I start with my basic graph layout. My independent variable is going to go on the x-axis, time. My dependent variable is going to go on the y-axis. If I look at this data is continuously changing over time. So it is going to be a line graph. And I have one line for the distance the car traveled. There's only one car, so there should be one line. So I want to have an idea of what that looks like, and we'll see why that's so important when we get into Excel. So now I'm in Excel. I have my data table. I'm going to go ahead and select my data table, and then I'm going to come up here to my Insert tab and then go to Charts. And you can click Recommended Charts, and it'll kind of generate some for you, and you can make some choices there. You can also select these individual ones. So I know it's going to be a line graph, so I'm going to select Line Chart here. And then it's going to give me some options of, do I want to have data points or no data points and so forth. But I want to just look at this graph and see if this makes sense. Here I've got, it disappeared. Here I've got two lines. A line here in orange for driving distance, and a line here in blue for driving distance, time. My y-axis is labeled 0 to 350, so that's kind of reasonable with what I have over here. But my x-axis is labeled from 1 to 7, and I really don't even know what that means. If I look at my independent variable time, it should be labeled somewhere between 0 and 3-ish, in that range. But this is data outside of that, so that doesn't make sense. Now, if you don't know what your data table or your graph should look like, you might select this graph and throw it into a report, and this doesn't really mean anything. So let's get rid of that, and let's take a look at something else. So that was what Excel called a line chart. Sometimes you'll use that, or likely you'll use an XY scatter plot. Alright, so here, my x-axis, which would be time, labeled from 0 to 3.5, and my data only goes to 3 like I see over here in my data, so that's good. My y-axis, distance, is labeled from 0 to 350, and it goes to 331, so that looks perfect. That's the kind of graph that I want. But when I look at it, some things don't make sense. Driving distance, kilometers, that's my title. I don't want that. And I don't have labels or units. So I need to do some work to fix this up and make it pretty. So I'm going to click on this, I'm going to click Axis Titles, and then it'll put in some text boxes for me. You'll notice there's some other things here that you can do, depending on what you want to accomplish. So, sometimes those things are handy. Maybe you need a legend. Maybe you need a trend line. You can even get an equation from this. So there's a lot of things that you can do with that. But for right now, I'm just going to add titles. And then I just click on my stuff and change it. So my title, I'm just going to call this driving distance. This I will call, well, I'm not going to redo it because it just disappeared, but you would just change your texts and make sure you include your label and your units, so time in hours, distance in kilometers.